Hi all, our instructive game today may be the first part of potentially a big series. I don't want to say how many lessons it will have, but basically the series will cover the battering ram critical success factors. So what is the battering ram? We've all seen films at one time or another where castles in real life, the old traditional castles where kings used to live, they were well protected fortresses, and sometimes the opposing army would need to use a battering ram in order to invade the castle. So what has this got to do with chess? Well, there's some obvious analogies. We do have a king in chess, and we say that we castle when we move the king into safety. So is there still this concept of the battering ram? Well, I believe there is, and it's interesting to consider chess in this kind of warring context. And when I talk about, critical success factors, the stronger the players will always say, it always depends. Yes, what does it always depend on? What are the critical success factors? So let's have a look at this game as an example. So Magnus Carlsen against Radjabov played in the Grand Slam final of Bilbao. It was an exciting dragon Sicilian. So both players were motivated much more to play for the win because of the point system. So the dragon featured more heavily in this tournament than usual, at this level, the 2700 plus level. So white is preparing already with bishop e3, this kind of Yugoslav type attack against the dragon, where the king will become under fire later, the black king, especially when white tries to trade off these dark square bishops to try and get into these potential weak dark squares around the opponent's king. So f3, it reinforces the centre, stops knight g4s, and allows white to continue now with this plan. Bishop c4 is a useful move as well, pinning that f7 pawn, and also guarding the c4 square, preparing to give itself up for later if black plays moves like knight e5 to c4. So black plays bishop d7, and now castles. So we have a very exciting position from the Sicilian dragon. Both sides castling on opposite sides, so white will try and use the g and h pawns as a kind of battering ram against the black king, and also maybe also try and invade on the dark squares, trying to weaken the black king by exchanging off that dark square bishop. Black has got the semi-open c file to work with, and also this important strategic outpost at c4, so that's often used in many variations with knight e5 to c4. Or can also use this b pawn potentially as a battering ram. So we'll see now, whose critical success factors were more critical, whose didn't work. So black played knight a5, so that's less common than going to e5, but still with the same idea potentially of this knight c4 later. So king b1, now b5. So potentially black's going to play knight c4, and in this game, black's committing actually to leaving a pawn on c4, which unfortunately, as the game turned out, proved to be a negative factor for the success of black's attack, because in many ways it provided a little bit more comfort for the white king, as we'll see. After h4, knight c4, white took on c4 and now played king a1. So white is preparing to defend that b2 pawn with a rook b1. And it seems that c pawn is also blocking this diagonal. Potentially, black wants to use the bishop to try and attack a2. It seems that the heavy artillery of black isn't enough in this game to create really decisive threats. So white continues to try and weaken the black king. And now this rook b6. So black, it seems it's very scary that black's going to double and threaten potentially rook takes b2 and queen takes c3 in some variations. White, though, takes the time still to play g4, and after hg now retreats the queen to e3. So not only defending that c3 knight for these variations of rook takes b2, but also, white doesn't really want this embarrassing position with h5 g5, where his queen is locked in there. Here is an example variation, try to rescue the queen, and black will be better because the roads have been closed now to black's king. And after queen e5, Rivka assesses this as much better. So the queen went back to e3, so white now is threatening to continue this battering ram effect with h5. The pawns are being used as ballast. They're the container of white's major resources, which are trying to get to the black king, and it's as if, there's kind of an explosion when these pawns are sacrificed. So after rook fb8, black continues with the attack on the b line. But really, what is black threatening? Well, we'll see there is a concrete threat generated. Quite a cunning one now. After h5 g5, black is trying to keep the lines closed against his king. And it seems with some success, because now after knight takes g4, gaining a tempo, the queen moves, still protecting c3 though. Now black plays f6. So has black secured a better king fortress than white? Well, it seems white's holding on by the skin of his teeth here, and black's just played this move f6. So would you be kind of depressed with your position here as white? How do you break into the black king position? It just seems far too solid. Well, here comes an important critical success factor. After knight f3, white is now threatening the move e5, which you would think, what would be the point of e5? The point of e5 is to block the queen's influence, to stop this defensive resource from this side of the board, the queen, protecting g5. So if black plays d takes e5, knight takes g5 will be a major threat. Black's not too worried at the moment. He plays rook a6. Now after rook hg1, the pressure's building up a tiny bit on the g line. Now black plays rook b4. And funny enough, with rook b4, it's easy to spot a simple mate here. If I'll let you see if you can spot it. This didn't occur, but say white played e5. Can you spot a nice move for black here? I'll give you 5 seconds. The nice move would be queen takes a2, because after knight takes, rook takes, king takes, rook a4 is mate, actually justifying that pawn finally, defending that b3 square. So this would be mate. So Carlsen had to play a seemingly weakening move now, a3, to defend against this crude mating threat. After bishop e6, the bishop is protecting the d5 square. It isn't just being played there to support c4. So maybe, he's worried about white playing knight d5. But actually, white now played e5. So the critical success factors of white's battering ram are being tested now, blocking communication of that queen from the g5 square. So now d takes e5, and now comes the violence, breaking open the black king fortress. Knight takes g5. Black dare not take it. He plays actually bishop f5, and now knight ge4. So white potentially has renewed threats now, like knight f2, maybe even, knight d5s in some variations. Black played king h7, because there was also potentially, a threat of queen h6 in some lines, with the idea of rook takes g4. So king h7 secures that h6 square, but now white plays queen e2. And the knight retreats to h6. And here, white plays rook g3, preparing to double up rooks, and also at the same time as attacking the black king, defending again that c3 point, and potentially a3. No, this queen sacrifice doesn't work in these kind of variations because of the knight a2 move. So, black now played bishop e6, and now an inaccuracy from Magnus. He played actually rook g6, which Rivka really doesn't like. It prefers the crushing move, well, it thinks it's crushing, with queen g2. Here's an example variation. Check, sacrificing the rook, check, rook g1, and this is a devastating attack now. So this kind of position, crushing. So Magnus actually played rook g6, and after knight f5, queen g4. But still, after queen g4, this was a blunder from black. Apparently, Ribka thinks bishop f7 and black would be fine. But after knight f5, queen g4, and all of a sudden, white's got a crushing position again. Radjabov played knight h4, and now the nice move knight g5 was played. So this really gets into the black king position, trying to gain access to h6 in a lot of variations. After takes, queen takes, white is threatening queen h6 mate. So black took on g6, and it's all hopeless now, because after check, rook g1, and black's king is in real trouble. White is not in trouble because Queen A3 still doesn't work, it's too slow. So the black pieces, although they're major pieces involved in this attack, there's no real breakthrough here, which is decisive. On the other hand, with just one rook and the queen, you know, white's broken through the black's king fortress. The white's battering ram in this game overcame the black battering ram. If Queen A3, this is just hopeless. So actually, after Rook G1, black resigned. I hope you enjoyed that game, and please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.